Good morning and welcome to the Morning Report. My name is Billy Lawson, and today we're going to talk about something that I believe exposes one of the deepest contradictions inside modern Democrat politics. The story is not really about one congressional district in South Florida. It's not really about one candidate. It's not even really about Debbie Wasserman Schultz. The story is about power. It's about survival. It's about political machines protecting themselves. And it's about what happens when the Democrat Party's public rhetoric collides head on with the reality of how politics actually works behind the scenes. But now we're watching something fascinating happen in Florida politics. We are watching the collision between those slogans and raw political survival instincts. Because when the political environment changes, it's when the maps change. You remember when the ground beneath a powerful incumbent became unstable. Suddenly, all of the language about new voices and the next generation becomes secondary to preserving power. And that's the marrow and the bone of this story. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been a major player in Democrat politics for years. Former, cha- Former chair of the DNC, deep, deep donor connections, national recognition, institutional backing, consultant networks, fundraising ability. She's not just some random local politician trying to find her footing. She is part of the Democratic establishment itself. She's a political institution. But politics changes when the maps change. And the redistricting battles in Florida altered the political terrain dramatically. Republicans redrew congressional maps in a way that strengthened their position statewide and weakened several Democrat strongholds. Suddenly, districts that once felt secure no longer looked so comfortable. Incumbents who had grown used to the relatively safe political environments suddenly had to think strategically about survival. Now, that's not some conspiracy theory, that's politics. Every politician in America understands this game, whether they admit to it publicly or not. So now we have a situation where Debbie Wasserman Schultz is looking toward Congressional District 20, a heavily Democrat district, and historically a Black political power district in South Florida. And here's where the tension begins. Because this is not simply viewed as by many people as one politician changing districts. This is viewed as an entrenched political machine moving into a district where younger Black Democrats were already trying to build their political futures. And that changes everything. See, if we were just about qualifications, Democrats could just say, hey, the best candidate should win. But that answer creates problems for them because for years they've argued that representation itself carries unique value. They have argued that lived experience matters politically. They have argued that identity and community connection matter. So now they are trapped between two competing narratives. One narrative says experienced institutional power should prevail. The other narrative says emerging representation and grassroots leadership should matter. And what often happens in politics when these two collisions occur, the younger candidate gets told, you should wait. It's not your turn. Maybe not directly, but maybe no one literally says the words, but the message is understood anyway. Wait your turn. Your time will come later. The party needs stability right now. This race is too important. We need someone with experience. We need somebody who can raise money. You know, back when I was involved in this, I was at a meeting and there was a Democrat candidate for one of the state rep seats. I believe Ms. Betty Reed was in that seat, and there was a young lady who was running against her, and she was point blank asked at this community meeting why she was running against Betty Reed. Why? And she said, because I'm grown and I can. And she was basically being told, why don't you just wait till she retires? Why don't you just wait until that's an empty seat? Hmm. She didn't. She ran against her anyway, and she lost for the very same reasons that this young man, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, is going to lose as well. So listen carefully, because this matters. This is not uniquely Democrat behavior. Republicans protect incumbents as well. Political parties are machines designed first and foremost to preserve power. Anyone who thinks otherwise has simply not been paying attention. But Democrats, especially, have built so much of their modern branding around generational change, diversity, activism, and elevating marginalized voices that movements like this expose contradictions in a much, much sharper way. Because young activists hear one message publicly and experience another message privately. Publicly, they're told, children are our future. Privately, they discover that the future has to wait until the current power structure decides it's ready to let go. 7 weeks coffee. It's the best. Let me tell you something else that's important. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is not entering the situation alone. When somebody with decades of establishment power moves into a district, they bring an entire ecosystem with them. Donors move, endorsements move, consultants, national attention, party pressure, fundraising networks, media relationships, institutional gravity itself moves. So now a younger grassroots candidate is no longer competing against a person or one set of ideas. They're competing against an entire political infrastructure that has been built over decades. Now, this is why resentment grows inside parties. And frankly, I think many young Democrats already feel like the system is managed competition rather than open competition. They are useful when the party needs enthusiasm, when they need votes, when they need young door knockers. Useful when the party needs, again, when it needs social media energy, when the party needs turnout operations. But when real power, real committee assignments, real donor access, real institutional influence that are at stake, suddenly the establishment closes ranks. And you would think after all these years, and I'm gonna just take a little detour, that somebody like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's been head of the DNC and it knows everything there is to know about the donor class, that she could have decided, hey, listen, there's this young person in a district in my state who could really need some help. Get some of the consultant class, some of the donor class to help them too. But you know what? They don't do that. Now Republicans don't do that either. Don't get twisted. Republicans don't do that either. They don't. Now, before people get upset, and some of y'all will, Debbie Wasserman Schultz has every legal right to run wherever she chooses under the law. This is not about legality. This is about political philosophy and internal party contradiction. Those are two separate conversations. And honestly, from a purely political survival standpoint, what she's doing makes complete sense. Politicians rarely surrender power voluntarily. Political machines rarely weaken themselves voluntarily. Incumbents almost never walk away quietly. This is how politics works in America. And if the district you occupied for years suddenly becomes dangerous, then you look for safer political ground. This is exactly what politicians do. But the question for Democrats is whether their activist base is willing to admit that reality openly instead of pretending politics operates entirely on moral principles. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: when political survival becomes difficult, ideology often becomes flexible. Suddenly, the slogans get softer, the revolutionary language gets more complicated. Representation must compete with electability. New voices must compete with experience. And grassroots energy always up against fundraising strength. And all of this happening while Florida Democrats are already struggling statewide. And that part simply can't be ignored. The Democrat Party of Florida is not operating from a position of strength right now. Republicans have dominated statewide elections repeatedly. Democrats are frustrated, fractured, and searching for a path back to competitiveness. That means party leadership is far more likely to prioritize stability and survivability over internal ideological purity battles. So, while there will be anger from younger activists and some grassroots organizers, I don't think this creates any massive permanent fracture inside the Democrat Party of Florida. I don't. I think ultimately most institutional Democrats will fall in line because survival instincts override almost everything else in politics. And this is another hard truth people don't like discussing honestly. Coalitions hold together when everybody believes they're getting something from the arrangement. But when power starts shifting, when opportunities become fewer, when districts become more competitive, suddenly coalition members begin competing against each other internally or influence and survival. That's what we're seeing now. Now, if I may say something that might upset some people, but it's still true. The Democrat Party often presents itself publicly as an anti-establishment, while functioning internally as deeply establishment. Right? The branding is revolutionary, but the machinery is not. The machinery protects itself, it protects incumbents, it protects proven fundraisers, donor relationships, and institutional stability. And when younger activists run into that reality, many of them become cynical very, very quickly. Because they begin realizing that slogans and power are not the same thing. Now, I know that there are some people who want to make this in conversational racial. And I'm intentionally avoiding that trap because I think it weakens this analysis. This is not primarily a racial story. Race is part of the political tension? Yeah, no doubt. Because CD-20 has historical importance as a Black majority district. It cannot be ignored. But the deeper story here is about political hierarchy and self-preservation. Okay, this is about whether entrenched power willingly steps aside for the next generation. And history tells us the answer is no. Not in Congress or in city government or corporate America or in academia, not anywhere really. People who acquire power generally want to keep it. This is why I believe younger Democrats are beginning to feel politically homeless inside their own party, where they were told activism would translate into influence, but increasingly they are discovering that influence still largely flows through money, institutional relationships, donor networks, and establishment approval. And honestly, Republicans should pay attention to this too, because the same patterns exist there as well. Republicans, I've said this for years, shoot their wounded and eat their young. Conservative voters constantly complain about Republican politicians who campaign like fighters and govern like caretakers of the status quo. Well, this phenomenon is not uniquely one party, but today we are talking specifically about Democrats because this conflict strikes directly at the heart of modern Democrat messaging. This is about how politically dangerous that perception is, not necessarily because it creates immediate electoral collapse. It probably won't, but because repeated moments like this slowly erode trust. Once trust begins lacking or leaking out of a political coalition, rebuilding it becomes difficult. People will begin asking some fairly uncomfortable questions. Was the empowerment language ever real? Do grassroots activists matter only when it's convenient? Does representation matter until the donor class gets nervous? These questions are hanging around. And social media makes these tensions impossible to hide now. 20 years ago, party leadership could manage these disputes quietly. Today, every activist has a microphone, camera. Every frustrated organizer has an audience. Every internal contradiction becomes public content within minutes. That changes coalition management entirely. But at the end of the day, I think the likely outcome here is predictable. The establishment will probably survive. The institutional machinery will probably remain intact. Democrat Party or floater will probably avoid a full-scale civil war because they simply cannot afford one politically. But survival and trust, they are not the same thing. That is the important distinction. The party may survive structurally while losing some credibility emotionally with parts of its younger activist base. And every time younger voices feel the rules change for the powerful, a little more cynicism enters the system. And cynicism is poison for political enthusiasm. So when we look at the entire story, I don't see a cartoon villain. I don't see a simple morality play. I see a political machine behaving exactly like political machines behave. I see a powerful incumbent responding rationally to a changing political map. I see a younger activist realizing that institutional policies and movement politics are often two entirely different worlds. I see a Democrat Party struggling to reconcile its public rhetoric with realities of power preservation. And that's the real story. Not outrage, not hashtags or slogans, it's power, political survival. And the uncomfortable reality is that in American politics, the next generation is often welcomed enthusiastically right up until the moment it threatens the current generational seat at the table. And that, my friends, is the Morning Report. Until we see you again, go out there and learn something, love somebody, and for goodness sakes, y'all take care of yourself. We'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye now.